I don't know if you all heard about this. 2 weeks ago, the power went out in my neighborhood in Montreal, in Côte-des-Neiges NDG, which is one of the most populous boroughs in the city. It was 30 below that whole freaking weekend. Most people's heat in the province of Quebec is electric because we are the province of cheap hydro. So we were without heat for, in some cases, for some people, 3 days. So my family left and went to a hotel the second night because we have the means to do that. But an 87-year-old woman in my neighborhood died because she and her husband decided to tough it out. And the firefighters came in for a wellness check and she got so cold that her heart stopped. This is a very real scenario.
I'll start with this. I think it's really important as security leaders and CISOs that we zoom way out and we look at, like, what is this entity I work for? Why does it exist? If it's a private company, how does it make money? What are we trying to do? And understanding the competitive strategy of the business and what the business's goals are.
I go in essentially with the traffic light, right? These are my green, yellows, and reds. The greens we don't really talk about. We've already dealt with that. We've had a previous conversation on it. These are things that we fixed. The yellow things are something that's up and coming that we probably have a project in place to fix these already. We're working on it. We've got effort to do it. They don't want the nitty-gritty details of that. The red is now where we're asking for your help. We're asking from board directive. We're asking for financial releases. We need some effort put in these. These are the things that are going to impact our business on some of those things we touched on, whether it's going to be a financial impact, whether it's going to be a reputation, whether somebody's going to lose a life, lose an arm, just need a Band-Aid, whatever that is. We have to relate that back to the business impact.
I personally find that a very helpful strategy is to know your board really well. So we all have this thing called LinkedIn. Look these people up, right? Find out what they do for a living, what they did do in their living. Find out what their interests were if you can find. Google it if you have to, right? If that, maybe they don't have a LinkedIn, someone probably knows them quite well, whether it be another executive or it could be even the mayor, if you have a good relationship with the mayor. So understanding the audience helps you to relate topics and discussions. We live in a world of tech, right? So you find yourself sometimes simplifying things in a way that other people can understand, right? So for instance, if I'm talking to Public Works, they know roads really well. So I talk about the data being roads, fiber connections being roads. They understand that. So I think that a very helpful tool is understand the people, right? That will help you relate examples and relate concepts to people that may not understand the ones and zeros, right? Make it personable if you can. They'll really resonate and they'll really relate to what you're trying to do.
The boards, once again, depending on personalities and everything else, they don't really care about that. What they really care about is impact or business impact. That's what it comes down to. So we got to get away from talking about the nitty-gritty details. We got to get away from talking about fear. The boards are going to be more concerned with how's that going to impact. And there's a lot of things that go into how is that going to impact us. And we could talk about nitty-gritty things like, oh, are these devices segmented? Do they have multi-home? I know we were talking about this with other people before. What levels of the environment can these devices talk in? They're not necessarily concerned with that, but they're looking at how does that in fact impact the impact of that device, right? What is the business impact? Is it going to impact us financially? Is there going to be environmental disasters that could come of this?
Welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this breakout. You had so many sessions to choose from. You chose this. Very pleased to see you all. I'm Vivien Suen. I'm a principal architect at TD Bank, where I lead the cybersecurity architecture practice. I have my esteemed panelists here. We're going to talk about boardroom barometer, how to communicate the language of risk at the board level. And I think as we saw in the session just before this, when they were talking about the power outage situation, how you communicate risk to the board so the board can make decisions also has a lot to do with how you prevent risk and how you design for resiliency. It's not just about the crisis. It's about that ongoing dialogue about risk and operations and resiliency and having that plan B, C, D, etc. And without that proper dialogue going on, can you really design for those kinds of scenarios? So I'm very, very pleased to welcome my fellow panelists, and we'll just go down the line and have everybody introduce themselves.
Hey, I'm Quincy Castro, CISO at ChainGuard, a bunch of stuff, and super happy to be here.
I'm Dave Cachia. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the municipality of Clarington. We're a town just east of Oshawa, for anyone that knows Ontario, about 115,000 people.
And I'm Ryan Bowery with Clarity. I'm the Principal Solutions Engineer for the Americas, focusing on OT, critical infrastructure, kind of across the globe.
Awesome. Okay, so I love a what not to wear conversation. So when we were doing our prep for this, I said, you know what, let's start this off. If everyone can share an example of what not to do when you're having a presentation or a conversation with your board or with any senior leadership. And I'll share one of my pet peeves. It drives me absolutely mental when I see somebody who's showing slides that do not support the story. And I don't even care anymore about whether or not the slides are busy or dense, because sometimes you do have to share a lot of information that you know someone's going to take away and read. And like, that's fine. But if you don't have a narrative and the narrative is not supported by what you're putting up on the screen or what you're giving people to take away, then you've wasted everyone's time and caused a lot of confusion. So that drives me absolutely mental when I can't pick out the narrative and it doesn't stand up. Anyone else want to jump in with an example of what not to do in those senior level conversations?
Yeah, I'd say like, don't go in there and just barf out a bunch of technical stuff and assume people are going to understand what you're talking about, even if they're things you really think you know anybody should be able to comprehend.
Oh, so like, don't go in there and just say to bleep the bloops.
Right, exactly. Oh, we had 8 billion attacks on our network, and this many were like this, and this many were like that. And it's like, what is this?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so I like to use stories when I have my conversations with boards. And I'll get to getting personal with your boards later on. But I think that in my world, we use real life examples of here's what could happen. Here's what we're trying to mitigate. And what I'm asking for today is to do this. Our boards generally are more reactive than proactive. So something has happened. We need to mitigate something. So I always like to use real world examples. When you use those real world examples, don't throw someone under the bus, right? So, in my world, there's other municipalities that may have gone through strife or may have had, some really nasty situations they've had to deal with that no one would want to do. But it's important that you don't want to throw anyone under the bus by saying like, this is what they did wrong and they were negligent and so and so. So because in my world, those council people or those board members could have affiliations or they could have connections to those entities. And you, by doing this, may be tarnishing yourself, but also tarnishing your peer.
I think that's a really good point. And I think that I'm really fortunate that a lot of the professionals in the cyber industry that I communicate with, there's very, very little schadenfreude that goes around, which I think is important. Like when I started my career in security, it was right around the time that monster.ca got hacked. Does anyone remember that? And we had like a sales rep on my team who was like, oh, we need to go out to everyone with this story and say, don't be like Monster. And I was like, don't do that, man. Like, you don't know who's in the room. You don't know if you're talking to someone whose information got compromised. You don't know if you're talking to someone whose spouse or sibling or cousin works there and lost their, like, you don't know. And the fact of like cybersecurity is that tomorrow it could be us. Right. So you never want to be that person. There's a certain grace that you have to grant to everybody because we're really all in this together. Ryan.
Yeah, kind of lastly on that, I mean, I guess there's so many things that we could probably pick from. I mean, I'm guilty of it as well, of what not to do. Learn some lessons. I would say, don't go in talking about fear, FUD, right? Yeah. The boards don't typically want that doom and gloom. Right? We got to go in with conversations of, what's happening, what we can do, and what business investments or strategies can we implement to make these business decisions together. It's, once again, building off of that. It's not all the technical jargon. It's not putting anybody to shame or, putting anybody else and bringing them down. It's all about what can we do now? What are we doing now? And what can we do better?
Yeah, so I think the important message, if I was going to tie all of that together, is that it's got to be a conversation that's grounded in reality. I know that Toronto's like a little bit of its own bubble and universe, and I used to live here, so I've been a citizen of the 416 universe. But I live in Montreal now. So the session that we just had where they were talking about the power failure scenario is very real to me. I don't know if you all heard about this. 2 weeks ago, the power went out in my neighborhood in Montreal, in Côte-des-Neiges, NDG, which is one of the most populous boroughs in the city. It was 30 below that whole frickin' weekend. Most people's heat in the province of Quebec is electric because we are the province of cheap hydro. So we were without heat for, in some cases, for some people, like 3 days. So like my family left and went to a hotel the second night because we have the means to do that. But an 87-year-old woman in my neighborhood died because she and her husband decided to tough it out. And the firefighters came in for a wellness check and she got so cold that her heart stopped. Like this is a very real scenario. And like, there's a whole hue and cry right now about, who's responsible, class action suit, yada, yada, yada. But a lot of the things that the folks on the panel said really resonated with me because, Hydro-Quebec doesn't control its budget. They have plans on how they're going to replace the infrastructure, but they don't control their budget, right? Rebuilding or refurbishing a transformer station is a huge infrastructure project. It's very disruptive. They actually don't have total control over that. So like, who's really responsible? But again, it comes back to those board level discussions and whether you're public or private sector, how are we as specialists and technical professionals elevating the right things up to the boards and the decision makers so they can make the decisions and advocate for the things that they need to. And I'm going to go to Dave for this about, something you said about really understanding who your board is so that you know how to appeal to them. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my world, I report to a CIO who reports to a council. And the council are elected officials. So they could be a carpenter in a previous life. They could be a lawyer. They could be a doctor. They could be any sort of trade. In the private sector, your fiduciary boards are generally high-level executives, retired, or maybe still doing those functions. So in my world, you could be talking to anyone of any walk of life, right? So I personally find that a very helpful strategy is to know your board really well. So we all have this thing called LinkedIn. Look these people up, right? Find out what they do for a living, what they did do in their living. Find out what their interests were if you can find. Google it if you have to, right? If that, maybe they don't have a LinkedIn. Someone probably knows them quite well, whether it be another executive or it could be, even the mayor, if you have a good relationship with the mayor. So understanding the audience helps you to relate topics and discussions. We live in a world of tech, right? So you find yourself sometimes simplifying things in a way that other people can understand it, right? So, for instance, if I'm talking to Public Works, they know roads really well. So I talk about the data being roads, fiber connections being roads. They understand that. So I think that a very helpful tool is understand the people, right? That will help you relate examples and relate concepts to people that may not understand the ones and zeros, right? Make it personable if you can. They'll really resonate and they'll really relate to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think it's like just as valid in a private organization as well. And like, hey, the audit chair sits on these other audit committees and they really understand, numbers and dashboards and being spoken to in this way that maybe you wouldn't have gone in and spoken to. Or conversely, like, hey, there's somebody here who sits on a board of a company that had a major breach. And so like, okay, that's someone that I can be conversant with around these topics. They're going to understand sort of the nuance of some of these things. And taking the time to go and meet those folks individually and to figure out where they are, to your point, like helps you come back and sort of assemble, like, how are we going to talk about this topic together? How can I help them govern this and sort of exercise their responsibilities on behalf of the company? Versus I think what a lot of folks do, particularly when it's their first board encounter, where it's like, oh, I read something and it said, these are the things you're supposed to talk about. So now I'm in here talking about the things I thought I was supposed to talk about, whether they're relevant to that audience or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything to add there?
No, I think you guys covered it immensely. So, I don't think I can add anything. I know Vivien usually wraps that up. So, no, I'm happy. I'm learning as well. So I think every interaction with a board, every interaction with my peers, I'm able to learn a little bit more from each and every one of those as well. So, I also appreciate not only being up here, but also listening to you as well, because there's different approaches with everybody. And, I like bringing it back to that personal level. It is funny if I bring it back to a way personal level right now. My wife and I are watching at night this TV series called Bull. I don't know if anyone's into that, but it's all about jury science, and it's understanding the jurors and how they're thinking. And I guess when I'm going in and talking to, whether it be C-suites, CIOs, and even the CEOs, putting things in perspective that they're really going to care about is really what my job is, trying to relate back to them. And I know I'm going to talk about this as well, and I'm really bad for this as well. And those things that I said, there's lots of things I've learned over and what not to do, is that technical stuff, right? A lot of these folks aren't necessarily concerned with the technical aspects, their backgrounds, right? If they're coming, who knows, from a financial background, HR background, they may not have the same level of nitty-gritty details that I may want to talk about. So I really got to focus on that and get more into the personal aspects.
Well, it forces you to like step outside of yourself a little bit, right? Like if you've ever been on like an ERM committee, I don't know, can we do a show of hands? Like who's been on like an enterprise risk committee? And you realize that like, oh, hey, I'm here to talk about cyber risk, but then there's like commodities pricing and, oh, the price of steel in India went up. And like, now that's going to impact our bottom line on these things we're making there. And like, I think that's been a real eye opener for me, is like stepping outside of this space and just understanding like the broad demands that are put on board members and on executives to run these organizations. Sorry.
You're absolutely right. We all contain multitudes, right? Every single one of us. Quick show of hands. How many people here consider themselves a technologist? Yeah. So, Ryan, how do all the bleeps and bloops and all the techie stuff get in the way of masking the message? Like this really seems to be something that technical teams struggle with at every level of the organization. Why is that such a challenge? How do people get around that?
I mean, for me personally, I think it's what I know, it's what I've done for so long. So it's just easy for me to fall back on talking about the bits and the bytes. The boards, once again, depending on personalities and everything else, they don't really care about that. What they really care about is impact or business impact. That's what it comes down to. So we got to get away from talking about the nitty-gritty details. We got to get away from talking about fear. The boards are going to be more concerned with how's that going to impact. And there's a lot of things that go into how is that going to impact us. And we could talk about nitty-gritty things like, oh, are these devices segmented? Are they, do they have multi-home? I know we were talking about this with other people before. What levels of the environment can these devices talk in? They're not necessarily concerned with that, but they're looking at how does that in fact impact the impact of that device, right? What is the business impact? Is it going to impact us financially? Is there going to be environmental disasters that could come with this? Is there going to be loss of life? Is there going to be reputation and brand damage to our products or to our company, to our business? I know in my previous life when I was on those committees of looking into the risk, those are the factors. We didn't really consider cyber risk being one of those factors, because what would I do? I could go over and I could just unplug the cable and I could run everything manually. But how would that impact everything else? Are we still going to be able to produce enough? Are we going to be able to meet our mandates and obligations to other companies that there is financial penalties if we're not producing enough, say, oil and gas, because that's the industry I came from as well. So there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. And once again, it's all of those things that more of the board is thinking of, is what's that going to do to our business? How's that going to impact our bottom line? And that's where what I've learned over these years is getting away from all the technical jargon. There's other people in the organization that do want to hear that and can handle that, but the board just really wants to understand, how does this impact us? What can we do? And what do we have to do to get out of this situation?
Right. Like when we're doing, cyber incident response or any kind of technical troubleshooting, you're like, okay, like here's the symptoms, where are the root causes, but it's kind of like a parallel thought process. It's like, okay, like we're talking about, technical issues, but if we have this service outage, what is the impact to the community? What is the impact to our customers, to our partners, to our suppliers? And then that grounds it in the real world, right? It makes it more relatable to Dave's point earlier.
I was going to say, I think we need to do some soul searching as an industry though too, because we've been our own worst enemies here in terms of propagating these ideas that cyber is about speeds and feeds and dashboards and all this kind of stuff. And to run a function, it is, right? But I remember talking to a CEO of a big industrial company, and he's like, well, I want to see the cockpit. Like, what do you see? And I'm like, you don't want to see what I see. Like, you won't understand it, and it doesn't change how you're going to run the business, But I think because we've conditioned people to think about this through pop culture, that like, oh, this is what the board should care about, or this is what the CEO should care about. They miss sort of the larger governance issues here around like, are we doing what we say we do? Are we a trustworthy organization? Are we spending the right amount of time on, tech debt and stuff like that versus innovation? And like that to me is where like the board conversation should be happening. Not, did we have this many critical vulnerabilities last month versus that many critical vulnerabilities, but bringing it back to things around like trust and governance and like, ethics and morality and stuff like that. So
yeah, that's really hard, right? Like at the end of I think every organization is dealing with this, with how you balance tech debt against innovation, right? Everybody to some extent is building the runway while the plane's coming in. And like, that's where you need to be focusing people to make those decisions.
Yeah. Well, and it's your example from earlier, if you had teed up a decision around the substation and said, hey, it's going to cost this much to fix this and there's going to be this much disruption, but you're going to save someone's life, no one would choose to delay it. But people are really bad at comprehending risk and being able to make risk-informed decisions.
Yeah, it's absolutely mental because it took a few days, because it happened over the weekend. It took a few days to order in the new parts, the thing. And then they're like, well, it's a 7 to 10 day effort to actually do the work. So this whole time they've been running generators all over the place. And then we have these rolling blackouts as the generators have to be refueled and all this, like the effort and the expense. And, there's my son's older. He's almost 14. So for him, it's a little bit of an adventure. But there are people with babies and young kids, and there's people whose entire tropical fish collections died, and it's sad. And it's, I mean, I make light a little bit, but it's been devastating for the community. And, I can't help but think, as you said, that if someone had framed this in terms of the impact to a community and harm and loss of life, that they, maybe they wouldn't have delayed it 9 years, but what do I know?
Right.
Yeah. How are we doing for time, by the way? I'm totally not paying attention. We good? We're good for time. That's great. Okay. So, what are some approaches that you found that really work? What are things that you guys practice or do or have seen other people do that help you to be that translator, to help guide decision making?
I mean, I'll start with this. I think it's really important as security leaders and CISOs that we zoom way out and we look at like, what is this entity I work for? Why does it exist? If it's a private company, like how does it make money? What are we trying to do? And understanding the competitive strategy of the business and what the business's goals are, let you then use your own expertise to sort of figure out like, what are the security levers available to me that I can pull to come up with the program that we're going to run, and to have a thesis of like, this is what it means for security to be successful at this entity. And then when you come in and you're engaged with your senior leadership team, with your board, then you're coming in with that thesis and you're saying, this is what I think success looks like for us. And it's going to be inherently very different at different kinds of businesses engaged in different kinds of activities. But starting from that position, I think then lays the groundwork for you to be able to talk about risks and talk about trade-offs and talk about the program that you're running in that context. And so it's not just like, oh, hey, we had these incidents or we have these vulnerabilities, but it's rather like, here are the things that present risks to our success in this area that we're in. And therefore, here are the things I'm going to be doing. And then here's what I need from you, the board. Here's what I need from my partners across the business to go out and like prove that thesis out and be successful.
So, I mean, people are used to security being the one that says no all the time. Like, no, you can't do it. And I've been hearing this for years now about, security as enabler to the enterprise or to the organization. Do you think that's actually realistic? Do you think we could actually get there?
I think it's realistic, but I think a lot of people pay lip service to that and then turn around and just do the same thing they've been doing the whole time. And so I think if you're going to say that, then you actually have to do those things, right? And you have to frame that stuff up. And then when you're coming in and saying no to stuff, it's not just, well, because I say so or because of best practices. It's like, hey, this runs counter to the thesis we have around how security makes this company successful.
Yeah, I think we'll touch back on risk again, right? So I think framing it as realistic situations, right? We talked about fun, but we don't want to go in there and doom and gloom. We don't want to scare them into oblivion. We talk about realistic situations. Taking those realistic situations and telling the story, crafting the story, and what could happen, What could happen if we don't do this? What risk are we willing to accept? What risk are we not willing to accept? And putting it into terms that they can understand goes a long way. And I also think, dollars make sense, obviously, but reputational risk is also a big thing too, right? You can always cast a check to fix something, but you can't fix your name. You can't fix your brand. If you were the last person in my world that was hacked, everyone talks about you, right? And until the next person gets smoked, everyone's talking about you, and they will continue to talk about you until the next person gets smoked. So protecting your brand is equally as important as protecting the dollars and cents. Like, you can have an outage and it take your sales down for a weekend, or you could do that. But what are the long-lasting implications of that?
Yeah, and that sentiment moves so fast now, right? With social media, and everybody's like so plugged in all the time. Like that sentiment moves so fast.
Yeah, our communications team is 24/7, 365, right? Whether it's a snowstorm or if it's a shortage of salt, right? It could be anything, and that's the real life situation. Our world obviously is a little different, but if a hack happens and it takes down all your utility systems, it takes down your ability to do recreational services, it takes down your ability for community programming, it takes, all these things have impact.
Yeah. No, for like a week after the power outage, I was still getting robocalls from Hydro-Quebec asking me to, conserve energy by turning the thermostat down, and that there might be rolling blackouts. I'm like, read the room, dude.
Yeah, I would say, building off of some of the things that were already said here, something that I've learned, and you said it in the opening about, I used to go in prepared, I used to talk technical, not really knowing my audience as well. My PowerPoints were lengthy, right? That old saying of death by PowerPoint, I was guilty of that as well. I think learning from that and learning that risk is more about the impact, once again, and what the impact to the business is, to the communities, and everything else that we're relating back to. I go in essentially with the traffic light, right? These are my green, yellows, and reds. The greens we don't really talk about. We've already dealt with that. We've had a previous conversation on it. These are things that we fixed. The yellow things are something that's up and coming that we probably have a project in place to fix these already. We're working on it. We've got effort to do it. They don't want the nitty gritty details of that. The red is now where we're asking for your help. We're asking from board directive. We're asking for financial releases. We need some effort put in these. These are the things that are going to impact our business. On some of those things we touched on, whether it's going to be a financial impact, whether it's going to be a reputation, whether somebody's going to lose a life, lose an arm, just need a Band-Aid, whatever that is, we have to relate that back to the business impact. So that's kind of how I now go into those boards. A simple slide, green, yellow, red. That's all we need to talk about. Keep it high level. This is where I need your help.
I like that. Everyone understands that too. Like, no, this is the thing that I really need you to think about. I'm guilty of it as well. Like, I'm in architecture, so sometimes I get so invested in the diagrams. Like, I was like, I got the lines all right. And one of the things I've been coaching my team on is every time we go into presenting architecture strategy or vision, I'm including a section now where we talk about what are our design principles, where we're coming from. And that really helps kind of ground in, we're not just, drawing pretty pictures and making this up. There is a vision, there's a North Star, and these are the design principles that are driving us. And I find that also helps in those conversations.
Yeah. I'll say something else on this too, because we were talking about business enablement, which is, look, in general, personally, I don't love the idea of CISOs owning risk, because I think you're there to advise the business. You're not there to, take that stuff on. But at the same time, if you keep seeing the same problems over and over again, you're not going to win a lot of fans with the executive team by just throwing grenades at people, right? And so I think there's places where you watch something struggle for long enough, you're like, I'll bet I can build a shared service that'll fix this problem for folks. And so, instead of taking shots at, application security all the time, hey, particularly big multinationals where you get some synergy around this, go start an application security team and say hey, we've been struggling with this. Here's a service, you can use it or you can not use it, but it's available for you to clean up some of these problems, and then be able to lean into that. And I think by coming in and both pointing out the issue and then giving people an opportunity to pick up a thing that you've built and help themselves, that helps people see that yes, we're all on the same team here together. We're all trying to solve these problems together.
Yeah. I feel like we're really kind of at an inflection point where it's not really the technical challenges now, right? It's about funding and prioritization and effort, and above all else, do no harm, right? Every time I walk into the conversations about AI and stuff like that, and what do we want to do, I always take the big post-it note and I put it on the wall that says "Do no harm." Whatever we're doing, like we've got to like not leave open the potential to cause harm to our customers, our colleagues, what have you. And it's not, we have so much capability at our disposal, but it's, again, what you choose, what you prioritize, how you balance it all out. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like do no harm cuts both ways too, which is, again, back to the idea of like stepping out of ourselves. Because if there's an AI diagnostic tool that can help you find lung cancer more accurately, but you've banned AI because of security, like
right.
who's the better for that, right? And so I think that's where we have to be flexible in our own thinking about what we're trying to do, and like, is this thesis we have that we run our program to appropriate for the organization that we're in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the do no harm thing really resonates with me because my past life is in critical infrastructure, in operational technology. So I'm in Sarnia, so a lot of petrochemical environments there where we have to produce oil, to heat houses in the middle of the winter. And a couple things that were already said here is, and we've been talking about how to talk to the board, but sometimes we need to know how to talk down as well. And you mentioned some of these, I would say personality traits between security where they're saying, thou shalt do this. I always phrase it as, OT makes the money, IT spends the money. So we need to protect that crown jewel to make sure that we're always up and going. And that's where some of these folks have to also learn the personalities coming down the chain as well, to understand why we're not just saying no to say no as well, but we have things to do, right? We need to make things run. And if there's too many controls and you're going to make it too hard, we're not going to want to do those. So it has to be an open communication between these teams. So even on the security side, we need to understand, why are we going to say no? And maybe it's not, you have to go patch because if anyone's from an OT or industrial environment, we don't patch. Sorry.
Well, you can't a lot of the time.
It is hard.
Right?
These things are 50 years old and manufacturers have gone out of business. There's no patches available. But as well, if you're talking about taking a unit down that's maybe producing, cement or something like that, if you stop that product from going, well, everything hardens, and now you're going to be spending $2 million to replace that unit. So it doesn't make sense to stop those processes. So once again, I think it's just that conversation has to go up and down the chain, take the technical jargon out of it, and have those business discussions. If we do this and we're saying to do this, how's that going to impact the business? And then we can relate that back up to the board that way as well.
It's kind of like the rules of improv, eh? The yes and, right? And what's next?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think maybe I'll go back to that do no harm, because I did spend 14 years in healthcare before coming to a municipal government, and the emergence of AI in that space is incredible. Healthcare in general is a very conservative sector. Before the pandemic, if you needed to do something, it took forever. When we saw the pandemic hit, everything changed. We needed rapid agility. We needed the ability to do screening and admissions and segregate patients based on different diseases or different functions. I've never seen anything like it. We moved so fast in 2 years than the 14 years prior, like incredible. Going back to AI now, we talk about diagnostic imaging. So when you go get your X-ray, you go get your MRI, you have someone looking at those images. You've trained this person for many years to screen these images, look for this particular pattern, examine this because it could be tumor, it could be something else. But we're seeing applications now that are able to do this at such speed and agility that it's making these practitioners so much more effective. Yeah. Now in the medical world, we can't be wrong, or we try not to be wrong, because it does have real human impact, right? There is that element of where's the trade-off, right? Do we trust the AI to the point where it's 99% and put the human aside, or do we just keep the way we've always done it? Yeah. Because that obviously works to some extent. Healthcare in Ontario and Canada in general, there's always room for improvement. But I think technology advancements like that, in measured and contained environments where we can actually test and we can see, is this worth it? Can we experiment safely though, yeah. Right? We don't want do no harm, obviously, but we need to find out where it actually works, where are the benefits, and where should we not do this? Because lives matter, right?
Yeah, it has to be trustworthy, right? Like, I love the medical imaging example. I saw a presentation at an AI conference a couple of years ago. I think it was Carnegie Mellon did this study, and it was exactly like diagnostic imaging, and it was about skin dermatology things. But they didn't really clean the data properly. So the model learned that anything with a ruler in it was cancer. Because if the technician sees a mole or something that looks suspicious, they'll put a ruler in to make it easier for the person who's analyzing, right? So they'll have the measurements there. So the model learned, okay, ruler means cancer. Like, okay, no, like that was a pretty obvious flaw that was uncovered, and they were able to correct for that. But, you know, wherever we use this, it's got to be responsible. It's got to be trustworthy. I was having dinner with a friend a few nights ago who's a surgeon, and in her practice, a bunch of her colleagues are using an AI tool now to do their charting for them. So it's like summarizing the conversation with the patient and all the notes, and it's a huge time saver. And she's like, well, what do you think about this? And I said, I think it's fantastic for what it can do for you guys. I'm very concerned about who your vendor is. I'm concerned about how they're safeguarding your data. I'm concerned about what happens in the event of data leakage or breach. And I gave her a whole list of questions to go back and ask the vendor, and her colleagues are like, wow, what did you do? But you know, the potential is enormous, but it has to be trustworthy. And then again, as technologists, we should be here to be that bridge, right?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to your yes and point, right? Because I think, you know, boards and CEOs want to see that you're on the side of the company, that you're on their side and you're trying to advance their mission. And look, a lot of these folks really they're not fluent in security. And so you get a reasonable amount of latitude as a security practitioner to say, hey, we're not going to do that, you know? And it's like, well, they say we shouldn't do it. But at a certain point, like, you have to use that power responsibly and come back to that like yes and concept. Like, yes, we're on your side. We want you to adopt these things that are going to make meaningful improvements. And here's how we're going to go do that in a responsible way.
Awesome. Wait, time check? I really should. Okay, we got five whole minutes. We can open the floor to questions. Or, yeah. Woo, okay.
Maybe a controversial question, but how does this conversation change after a major incident?
How does this conversation change after a major incident? First of all, everyone's super stressed out and not their best. So there's that. There's probably a lot more F-bombs. There's probably that. That's a great question. How does the conversation change after an incident? I guess you have to really, okay, I'm gonna throw a thought in there. I'll let you guys chime in. I think you have to have the emotional intelligence to understand the right time to pivot from crisis mode and immediate action to the longer term recovery. And there's this curve that you go through, and there's a point at which, and most people are bad at this because you don't really have the time to reflect, but then how do we turn this into a teachable moment for longer term transformation and resilience? That's a step in the feedback loop that we often miss. But navigating that for technical leaders, I think, relies a lot more on your emotional intelligence than your technical knowledge in helping to navigate that. That's what I think. Yeah. So
I'd say there's two kinds of incidents. There's the embarrassing kind and the not embarrassing kind. And so how the conversation with the board is going to go is very much going to depend on what came before. And if you were in there every quarter being like green, 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 nothing to worry about, and suddenly it's like, oh, the password on the RDP server was ABC123, that's going to be a really ugly conversation. But I think if what happened ties into the risks that you've been talking about, and you're like, look, we knew when we acquired this business that their security standards weren't up to spec, and we shouldn't have let them stay on their own tech for this long, but we did because of these political reasons. That, I mean, as ugly as that conversation can be, at least it's grounded in facts and it's speaking to things you've talked about them before. And I think that puts you on good footing, to your point, to like decide, okay, what do we do after this? How do we recover and preserve our customers' trust, preserve our ability to operate, or whatever those parameters are you're trying to maximize?
Yeah, and I think to your point, the context matters, right? The story matters. What's the history? What's the sequence of events? They want to know, they don't want the whole story. Like, they'll be there and they'll be bored. But they want to know what's important. What happened and how did it happen, and how do we prevent this from happening again? And the reality is, shit happens, right? That's just life. But, was it negligence? Was it, hey, I've been telling you about this for the last 6 months, and you guys said this is a risk we're willing to accept? Who owns that, right? Your job is to present the facts, present the risks, and let them make the decision whether or not do we mitigate this, do we not mitigate this, is this something we can defer? It really comes down to what's the whole story and the CYA part of it, right?
Yes.
Like, we've talked about this. This is not new. Yeah. Or if it is new, it's novel, then you got to give yourself some grace, right? Like, we can't predict the future sometimes. If we've noticed that the smoke detector has been beeping for the last 6 months and then the house burns down because the battery died, whose fault is that? It's been chiming. It's been going off at the last 6 months, and you let it die, and then the house burnt down. So the facts matter, the history matters, and also the cover you're behind.
Yeah, and I would say that, sometimes it can get heated, right? And sometimes there's some finger pointing and things like that, which is why CYA is important. I would say being able to be that person in the room that can maybe take control of the situation in a sense where, hopefully we have good disaster recovery plans, business continuity. That's where those are really going to be tested, and maybe some more heated conversations depending on how well we've done that and how well we've practiced those. My belief is always, and stuff happens. It's going to happen. Something's going to happen. But it's how do we recover from that is really what's going to tell that story, right? We can talk to the board. We can say, we know it happened. We got it under control. This is our plan. This is what we're doing. These are what we need from you. This is the help that you can provide us. Let's do this. We can do a post-analysis afterwards. But for now, let's focus on the issue at hand and get into recovery mode and get that going. Yeah. So you kind of have to be that leader in the room at that point.
Yeah.
And if you've got folks that are fluent in security on the board, pull them into your tabletop exercises and make them a part of what's going on and challenge them on how would you like to engage in this situation?
There was one more question. There was one more hand, I thought, or maybe two.
Hands. Oh, yeah.
I think what you're highlighting, if I understand correctly, is that maybe the function of the CISO, because it just encompasses technology, information security, their role is being extended, and you're not collaborating with senior risk officers, for instance. You're responsible for technology risk. But what we're talking about is that technology impacts the business in many ways, and there's other risks that are not necessarily your area of expertise. You become experts in this, but it's not your responsibility. So how do you engage the senior risk officer to work together, identify what is reputational risk, what is business continuity risk, and how does that relate to technology? There's going to be collaboration at the C-suite, and not just be the information technology guys that are responsible when something like that happens. It's not completely all up to you until your responsibility. If the senior risk officer has not identified those risks as part of their responsibility, then the board has a problem.
Yeah, I feel like you answered your own question there, which is that you need that collaboration.
The fact that the CISO is taking a lot of responsibilities in technology, and perhaps it's not necessarily all your responsibility.
Yeah.
Your responsibility is information technology security.
Yeah, and it gets
reputational or business interruption.
Yeah,
yes, it's part of your role, but it should not be your responsibility.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think people forget that those things are interrelated. And so it's sort of like, oh, well, security is this technical thing over here that people don't understand. And then it's like, yeah, but what if, it's out in the news, right? What if you lose control of the story? And now that's not, a technical risk issue over here that you can cover up. That's like major impact on the company. And I think a lot of folks don't always tie those pieces together. And so you do need that collaboration to help people pull that thread and understand, hey, if this goes wrong, this may be out of our control before we even have been able to get the facts and figure out what's going on.
It should be your responsibility. You should not be reporting about things to the board.
It's a shared responsibility.
You guys should say, well, this is, yes, I'm responsible for the bits and the bytes work together.
Yeah.
The pipe's working, but this has repercussions beyond my role.
Yeah.
So everybody should be engaged before it gets to the board.
Absolutely. Informed and consented, right?
Yeah.
You have that RACI chart, and just because it's ones and zeros doesn't mean it's your problem. It's a business problem. Yeah. And I know that I saw a sign for wrapping up, so I'm going to let you.
So,
just a quick question. So I've been the executive who had to tell the board they're under a major breach, and I now sit on 5 corporate boards and have received the call from the CEO saying we're under a major breach. What do you wish board members would do to help support you together? Can they ask you to, besides give you files money?
Wow.
Ask for.
What would, that's a great question. What would you love for your board members to be able to do to help you better other than just give you a big bag of money? Because that always helps.
Yeah, I think being fluent in the risks and the topics that are being discussed and not treating cyber like it sits in a silo over here, but understanding for yourselves like how it influences the success or failure of that enterprise, and being able to ask good questions in those meetings and challenge the other folks that are in front of the board around their piece of that. Because I think it's easy to sort of park it over here and say, oh yeah, ransomware or whatever, but that misses these larger sort of reputational and like go-to-market challenges that security failures can cause for companies. And the more that technology becomes fundamental to any enterprise, the more we need to be asking those questions.
That's great. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's exactly what I would do too. I think asking the questions and having them partially own and trust you, right? Trust comes with time. You can't just trust overnight. You have to build that trust. So I think if there's a relationship that's been built, surrounding trust, I think having that trust in you to come to them with the information, the facts, and then hopefully an agreement of what are the next steps.
Yeah. And I think like so frequently sitting in these seats, like we find ourselves in the position where we need to educate the board members that we're briefing out to. And like, can you imagine like having to teach someone on an audit committee, like how to read a financial statement? You know, it's crazy. And so, I mean, that's my big wish in the world, is that we had more fluency in those locations so that there was good governance and like there was some challenge and pushback on some of these things that we're going in there and saying.
Yeah, I would say, and I'll do it quickly because I know we got the wrap ups and stuff and I don't want to get yelled at, but I'm also hoping and wishing in my community where I am, I'm trying to get more board members to have some form of cyber and risk background, right? Bring those people into the board because everything we do nowadays touches technology, whether we like it or not. So having somebody at that board that understands technology risk, business risk, cybersecurity, they don't have to be necessarily an expert in it, but if they have that basic understanding, that's always my wish for the boards, is that they do start bringing in those other folks so we can have those truthful and sometimes horrible conversations.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all so much for coming. This was a wonderful conversation. 10 out of 10 would panel again. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Cheers, everyone.